The rescue pod descended through the ash-choked atmosphere of Kepler 442b's third colony, its sensors painting a grim picture of devastation below. Elsa gripped the control yoke with her secondary manipulators, her compound eyes processing the thermal signatures that dotted the ruined cityscape. As a HFY rescue specialist, she had seen disasters across 17 star systems, but something about this one felt different. Radiation levels critical, her AI companion chirped. Biological contamination at 87%, estimated survivor count, 0. The human colony had been struck by a cascading reactor failure followed by seismic events that reduced their settlement to rubble. Elsa's species had protocols for such scenarios: sweep for data cores, salvage technology, catalog the dead. The HFY were efficient, practical. Emotion was a luxury reserved for safer times. But humans were different. Humans were allies now, after the Treaty of Proxima. They deserved more than cold efficiency. Elsa sat down in what had been the colony's central plaza. Through the viewport, she could see twisted metal and pulverized concrete. Small fires still burned in pockets where oxygen remained. She activated her environmental suit, a biological necessity for her methane-based physiology, and stepped into the hellscape. The Geiger counter screamed immediately. Too much radiation. Any human survivors would be suffering from acute poisoning by now. She calculated their timeline. The disaster had occurred 43 hours ago. Without medical intervention, even the hardiest human would be dead or dying. She began her systematic sweep, moving through the rubble with practiced efficiency. The first bodies she found confirmed her fears: a family huddled together, killed instantly by the initial blast wave. She marked their location for retrieval and moved on. Then she heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist in this graveyard. Crying, an infant's cry. Elsa's translator struggled with the frequency, but the distress was unmistakable. She scrambled over a collapsed residential tower, her 6 legs finding purchase where bipedal species would have failed. The crying grew louder. She expected to find a dying child, perhaps trapped in an air pocket, living its final moments in terror and pain. She expected to document another tragedy, another reason to hate the universe's cruelty. What she found instead stopped her completely. In the basement of what had been a school, protected by 3 meters of collapsed structure, sat a human male. David, according to the ID beacon his suit was broadcasting. He was covered in dust and blood, his left arm bent at an unnatural angle, his face gaunt with exhaustion and pain. But in his right arm, cradled against his chest, a baby slept peacefully. No, not just one baby. As Elsa's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw them. 7 infants, arranged in a circle around David, each swaddled in whatever fabric he had been able to scavenge. Some slept. Others cooed softly. One was nursing from a makeshift bottle fashioned from medical tubing and a plastic container. "Identify yourself," Elsa said, her translator rendering her chemical speech into human language. David's head lifted slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips cracked. "Rescue." His voice was barely a whisper. "HFY emergency response. You are David Chen, colony security officer." Now I'm just this." He gestured weakly at the infants. "Are there others? Did anyone else make it?" Elsa's silence answered him. She watched something die in his eyes, replaced immediately by a desperate intensity. "These kids," he said. "I found them in the daycare center, the staff. They didn't make it. I've been rationing the formula I could find, keeping them warm, the radiation though." He coughed and Elsa's sensors detected blood. "I'm not going to make it much longer, but they need to, please." Elsa moved closer, scanning the infants with her medical suite. Impossibly, incredibly, they were stable. Radiation exposure was minimal. David had positioned them in the center of the room, where the collapsed structure provided the most shielding. He had given them the emergency anti-radiation medication from his own kit. The suit he wore, she realized, was military-grade shielding. He had wrapped the bobbies in pieces of it. "You stripped your own protection," she observed. "Kids need it more," David coughed again. "How long until extraction?" Elsa calculated. "My pod can take 3 adults or equivalent mass. With the infants, 2 trips minimum. But you require immediate medical attention. You're showing signs of acute radiation syndrome, internal bleeding, and take them first. You will die." "I know." David adjusted the baby in his arms, who had begun to fuss. He hummed something, a human lullaby her database identified, and the infant settled. "I've known since hour 12. Took most of the antirad meds myself the first day, thought I could push through, maybe fix the reactor. Stupid. Should have saved them for the kids." "You did save them. By using the medication, you remained functional long enough to care for 7 infants in impossible conditions." "Math's still math. I'm dead either way. They don't have to be." Elsa experienced something unfamiliar, an emotional response that her species philosophers claimed their kind had evolved past. Humans called it admiration, respect, perhaps even awe. She had seen bravery before. Soldiers who held lines against impossible odds, pilots who steered dying ships away from populated zones. But this was different. This was not a moment of heroic sacrifice in the heat of battle. This was 43 hours of conscious choice, every minute another decision to endure agony for beings that weren't even his own offspring. "The Vexarai have protocols," Elsa said slowly. "But we also have medical technology. My pod has a stasis chamber." "For 1 person, maybe 2 if they're small," David shook his head. "The math is not as simple as you believe. Vexarai physiology allows us to survive in low-oxygen environments for extended periods. I can remain conscious in conditions that would kill you. If I place you and 3 infants in stasis for the first trip, keep 4 infants in the passenger bay, I can make this work. You'd be exposed to the radiation without full cabin shielding. Vexarai cellular structure is more resistant to ionizing radiation than human tissue. I will survive." David studied her with eyes that seemed too old for his face. "Why?" "Because," Elsa said, already gathering the infants, "I have seen too many species who would have let them die. I have seen too many who would have followed protocol, saved what could be easily saved, and left the difficult cases behind. But you didn't, and I begin to understand why the Galaxy Council was wise to make peace with humanity." She worked quickly, efficiently, loading infants into portable life support modules. David tried to help with his 1 functional arm, but she waved him off. "Conserve your strength. We have a difficult journey ahead." As she carried the first load to her pod, David called out, "Hey, Elsa, right? That's what your ID says." She turned. "Thank you for not doing the math the easy way." Elsa's translator couldn't quite capture the emotion she felt, but she tried anyway. "Thank you for teaching me that some equations have variables my species forgot to consider." The rescue took 6 hours total. 3 trips for the infants, 1 final trip for David, who slipped into unconsciousness during extraction. Elsa's body absorbed radiation that would have killed a human 10 times over, but her redundant cellular repair systems managed the damage. When they reached the hospital ship in orbit, the human medical staff stared in disbelief at the 7 healthy infants and 1 critically injured man who shouldn't have survived. "How?" the chief medical officer asked Elsa. She thought of David in that basement, burning himself away to keep 7 tiny lights alive in the darkness. She thought of every calculation she had made, every protocol she had technically violated, every risk she had accepted. "Humans," she said simply, "have a word for it. Hope. Hope and stubbornness, and a refusal to accept what the universe declares impossible." David survived. The radiation damage was extensive, requiring months of treatment, but human medicine had advanced significantly. The 7 infants were adopted by families across the colony's survivor network. They would grow up knowing the story of the man who gave everything to keep them alive. Elsa returned to her rescue work, but something had changed. She began training other Vexari responders not just in protocols, but in exceptions, in the mathematics of impossible choices, in the calculations that went beyond cold efficiency. Years later, when asked why she had risked her life for humans she barely knew, Elsa would remember David's words, "Kids need it more." And she would add her own, "I learned that day what your species means by humanity. It is not a species designation. It is a choice to see value beyond calculation, to protect the helpless even at ultimate cost. The universe is cold and mathematical, but consciousness, true consciousness, is the defiance of entropy. It is the warmth we create in the darkness." The story spread across the galaxy, retold in 1,000 languages. The Vexari, the calculating and logical Vexari, had learned something from humans. Sometimes the most logical thing is to be illogical. Sometimes survival means more than just staying alive. Sometimes it means being worthy of survival. And in the arms of those who refuse to let hope die, even the dead can find life. End.